Let's look at some urban sustainability issues under this uh, general rubric of community resilience examples or insights from South Asia. Here we are in Nepal again, making urban waste management and drainage sustainable in Nepal. Again, very brief, just reading key messages. Cities in Nepal are facing urban flooding and waterlogging risks, which can be addressed by more investment on constructing drainage systems. Almost sounds like a motherhood statement, but it is true, and we need to remind ourselves of these things. Without proper solid waste management, the returns from investment on urban infrastructure would be low after a few years. There are also lots of health issues. So if you have urban flooding and solid waste management is not managed properly, then you end up with exacerbate. Floods bring health issues anyways, and if you have waste mixing with it, then you will have more serious issues. And this region, tropical countries on the Indian subcontinent, are particularly vulnerable to diarrheal diseases, and sometimes the mortalities are unacceptably high. So this combination of flooding risks and solid waste management issues can be a deadly combination. Additional user fees, revenue from recycling waste, and additional import duty on importing plastic raw materials provide enough resources for managing solid waste, which helps appreciating urban property prices. In general, now there is this new field of trying to figure out how climate risks are affecting real estate market, business investments. Other than reducing vulnerability, increasing resilience, people are also thinking about climate impacts when they are making investments or buying houses or apartments and so on. So all these things have to be considered together. So looking here at effectiveness of information and street bins in keeping the neighborhood cleaner, sometimes simple adaptation measures can make a big difference. I'm always reminded of this urinals in toilets. Well, urinals in toilets, but they have a little tattoo of a fly, which helps people aim better and reduces spillage. Okay, so little hints can go a long way. The key findings of the research are summarized below. Neighborhoods and streets are cleaner due to intervention. There was a 9% increase in the perceived cleanliness of the streets and 14 to 22% point increase in the perceived cleanliness of the neighborhoods after the intervention. There are some nice research studies that show that if you walk into a bathroom that smells clean, then people tend to be more careful about how they use it, as opposed to a bathroom that looks dirty and doesn't smell clean, then people also are not as careful. So the way the mental models work is strange, but they can be used for making positive differences. More households started giving their wastes to waste collectors due to the intervention. There was an 8 to 10% point increase in households that give household waste to collectors instead of burning or throwing it out. Okay, no impact on the at source segregation. However, our results suggest that there is no impact of the intervention on at source segregation of the waste. There is a lot of stories behind segregation, recycling. It turns out recycling is really not effective. Even when people segregate, they're collected and often not dealt with carefully at the treatment centers of the aggregated recycling material and so on. So this systemic issues as well. It's not just individual behavioral issues. A framework for sustainable financing of municipal solid waste management. It's from this paper here. So we can start anywhere. So let's start here in revenue and cost to finance, and that can go into management and can have a feedback. And here you have material recovery and collection efficiency. As I mentioned, even if people segregate, what happens to the material recovery and what is the collection efficiency? So that affects management, and they obviously then feed to the sustainability of financing of solid waste management, which then also gets feedback from cost being greater than revenue, then plastic import tariff can be used to compensate, reduce and reuse, which can feed into reducing plastic waste, and that affects management as well. And public import tariff can transfer some sustainability to financing of solid waste management and so on. So is this a typology that applies everywhere? Not necessarily, but this is what the authors imagine in this case of urban sustainability in Nepal. Moving to chapter 22, do community-based institutions spur climate adaptation in urban informal settlements in India? Urban centers are financial centers, often innovation ecosystems. People move there to find employment. A lot of immigrants come from rural areas or poorer states and so on. And then within the urban environment, you have solid settlements, rich people or middle class people, and then you have informal settlements, which can be slums sometimes, but slums can have a very vibrant economies as well. Key messages here: empirical evidence in this paper of women-led community-based organizations to lead the way in increasing awareness about climate change and spurring climate adaptation action in the informal settlements in developing countries. That's a long sentence, but you have a way of increasing awareness about climate change and spurring climate adaptation action, especially when women are involved. While CBOs by definition are inclusive institutions, yet they may need to be more sensitive towards participation of marginalized in the slum setting. So, as I mentioned, slums usually they don't have agency in water supply, energy access, and so on. So then you want to go and get them to worry about climate change. Then you obviously need inclusive institutions, which are theoretically there, but they need to be more sensitive towards the participation of these marginalized people in the slum setting. Basically, they have to be, they have to trust the organizations which are coming and asking them to participate. CBOs may have the potential to be the bridges between slum dwellers and local governments to access development and adaptation benefits. Okay, so this is the framework for the study that we are looking at here on community-based institutions. Vulnerability of a system to climate risk. Hazards include heat waves, flooding, vector-borne diseases. Systems include slum community. Attribute of value here is human health, and temporal scale is basically near real time, and that has to feed the adaptation by system in terms of action taken by household to reduce health impact of climate hazard. It also comes from the adaptive capacity of the system, which includes institutions, assets, physical and financial assets. So it could be dealing with heat waves in terms of cooling centers, hydration centers, shelters, etc. Information and knowledge, human capital, and technology, which also feeds into adaptation by system. Okay. To read off some of the other findings, adaptation involves an alteration in something, the system of interest, activity, sector, community, or region, in response to something, the climate-related stress or stimulus. The forms that adaptation takes can be classified in many ways. One way of classifying adaptation options can be based on Morgan's suggested 4 conceptual approaches to reducing technology-induced risk through modifying the effects and the exposure. What are these 4 conceptual approaches? The natural and human environment can be modified, for example, by raising plinth level to avoid flooding of the house. Fairly straightforward adaptation, but upfront costs can be an issue, especially when floodings arrive after you have built your house already. Exposure processes can be modified or avoided. For example, bed nets and netting screens on windows and doors can be installed to avoid mosquito bites. There are details here. For example, even providing nets didn't lead to the use of these nets in many African countries, and often there are mosquitoes that bite during the day and not at night. So if you're working outside, that can be issue. Water ponds, ponding and storing water outside, etc., can or vegetation, etc., can aid mosquito populations and so on. So often they are complicated, but these are simple measures in terms of bed nets and netting screens. The effects processes can be modified or avoided. For example, taking oral rehydrating salts in case of dehydration in heat waves, taking medicines for malaria or dengue if affected by it. Okay. The effects, once they occur, can be mitigated or compensated for. For example, compensation given by local governments for loss of property during extreme climate events. And in terms of observations and conclusions from this chapter, this paper provides empirical evidence on the effectiveness of climate action goals to enhance the awareness of climate change, awareness about specific adaptation options to reduce climate impacts, and to facilitate the implementation of climate adaptation goals, adaptation options by slum households. We expected the household members of community action group to lead in taking climate action because of access to information about adaptation options. So again, you need some sort of a structure where there are leaders who can get the information and translate it into action for adaptation options, and various training activities conducted by the CAGs. This did hold true, as we found that the household members of CAG were more likely to take climate action than the control group, particularly in case of those options which are less commonly known, such as green roofing and airlight ventilation. We even saw spillover effects to non-CAG households who also took significantly higher climate action compared to control groups. This study further contributes to the literature on the role of institutions, particularly decentralized and participatory institutions, in enhancing adaptive capacity and response actions of slum households and communities to climate change. While CBOs cannot build the trunk infrastructure, so elevated roads, water, sewer, and drainage mains, that all city areas and zones actually need, they can help install and make smaller connections and or pipes that feed into the trunk infrastructure, thereby improving the inclusion of slum households in the use of trunk infrastructure. Slums are built very closely packed and not many new additions can be made, so excess water, waste, etc. has to be piped out. Okay? Example of this was seen in the study when community together elevated an inner street connecting to the main road so that flooding could be reduced. This battle goes on in urban centers all the time. Let me make sure, I think I said CAG wrong, so let me add that info here before I close. Okay, sorry about that. CAG is Community Action Group, which is kind of the early adopters who then can help others in adopting the strategies or plans that are developed. They can be simple things like connecting the main trunk to the inner structure of the slums and so on and so forth. So just remember, CAG is Community Action Group. Okay.